Hello, this is joint work with Luise Häuser, Taraka, Rama, Mattis List, and Alexandros Stamatakis. My name is Gerhard Jäger. R sounds sound for phylogenetic reconstruction. This is a study where we compare different kinds of data for performing phylogenetic inference. So phylogenetic inference, this is an idea which comes from computational biology. So this is a family of statistical models and algorithms which takes data about the diversity of different species or different languages and reconstructs an evolutionary tree, a phylogeny, which explains the diversity we observe among synchronous data. So this has been applied to reconstruct language family trees since more than 20 years now. It is widely being used and accepted. But there's some debate going on about what are appropriate data when we compare languages computationally. The standard practice these days is to use cognacy data. So basically lexical data, while in classical comparative historical linguistics, sound correspondences are considered the most reliable data sources, and establishing shared sound laws is considered a conclusive demonstration of a relationship between languages. Why in computational studies, the standard practice these days is, well, to use Bayesian phylogenetic inference and use binary cognate vectors as input. We start with wordless. Human annotators classify these words, the entries, according to the cognate class they belong to. And then for each cognate class we can construct a binary vector over the languages under consideration, where one means presence and 0 means absence. And then the modeling assumption is that gaining or losing a cognate class are random processes which happen along the history of language, and this is being modeled via continuous time Markov chain model. So here is a simple illustration. Suppose we are studying a bunch of Germanic languages. We collected the translations of the concept big into these languages, and then human annotators find that the German and the Dutch word for big are cognates, so they go into one class, and then the Scandinavian words for big go into a different class, and the English word goes into the third class. Then everything is arranged in a binary matrix with languages as rows, cognate classes as columns, and each column is modeled in a tree as a sequence of gain mutations and loss mutations. So for the red vector here, so we would assume one gain mutation here and a loss mutation here. For the blue vector, a parsimonious explanation is that we have one gain mutation happening here, for instance. And this is done for each cognate class, and then the tree, simplifying a bit, the tree which best explains the distribution of ones and zeros while making few assumptions about mutations is considered a good tree. Now this is different from classical historical linguistics, because in historical linguistics, to demonstrate that, for instance, here this West Germanic group forms a valid subgroup of the Germanic languages, you have to demonstrate shared innovations regarding the sound system, so shared sound laws. Right? So while in computational phylogenetics, as it's being practiced today, shared innovations regarding the lexicon are the crucial pieces of evidence. So we figured it should be possible to take this basic intuition of neogrammatical linguistics and implement it in a phylogenetic inference setting. For this, we need data regarding sound correspondences, and we applied a novel approach for inferring a sound correspondence pattern automatically. Then we used the state-of-the-art method for phonetic alignment, and we fed the result into Bayesian phylogenetic inference. On top of this, as a sanity check, we also used maximum likelihood phylogenetic inference, and this proved useful. And we compare this workflow with the by now traditional workflow using cognacy data. And comparing the results gives us some insight about how strong the signal in these different kinds of data are. So how do we get these sound correspondence data? Here's an illustration. So this is a group of cognate words from Quechua, which are very similar regarding the root, as you can see. And then we used the lexical method developed by Mattis List and co-workers to arrange the words in such a way that homolog segments are in the same column. This is done as good as possible. And then we observe for some columns, so this looks good, like the first 4 columns here. So we have a reflex in each language, but then we also have a few columns where we have to assume gaps in many languages. And if we have many gaps, so this is evidence that this is perhaps not part of the root, but is some kind of affix, which should not be considered for establishing sound correspondences. So in the next step, after doing this multiple sequence alignment, we trim these alignments, basically throwing out columns which don't contain a very reliable signal. And then these trimmed alignments are reformatted as binary presence absence matrices, similar to the cognacy data, and then used as the basis for phylogenetic inference. We used 10 datasets from the Lexibank repository, so a collection of word lists spanning many language families. We linked these data to the Glottolog classification and used Glottolog as a gold standard. The sounds were provided in the phonetic transcription underlying the cross-linguistic transcription systems initiative. And then the pre-processing steps are doing phonetic alignment, trimming the alignment, computing correspondence pattern, and represent everything in a binary presence-absence matrix. Besides, we also implemented a traditional workflow using the cognate classification and representing them as presence-absence matrices. So we did phylogenetic inference with both types of data, and we did the third step, combining these character matrices into one big data source and doing phylogenetic inference, which uses both kinds of data. There are 3 possible hypotheses regarding the outcome. So it could be, and this would be a nice finding because it would validate the intuitions of classical historical linguistics. So it could be that phylogenetic inference is more accurate on sound correspondence patterns than on cognate patterns, but it could be that the state-of-the-art practice using cognacy data comes out better, or it would also be plausible if we find that both kinds of data basically reflect the same underlying reality, and combining different data sources gives the best result. Okay, Bayesian inference. On this slide, you have all the specifications regarding priors. We used Mr. Bayes, and mostly we used the default settings. We used the stopping criterion to identify when the chains have mixed. One parameter turned out to be interesting. It is one which usually doesn't draw a lot of attention in phylogenetic linguistics, and this is the modeling of rate heterogeneity. So different cognate classes or different sound classes evolve at a different rate. All right, so the Swadesh lists are collected because it is assumed that the entries evolve slowly, but not at the same rate. And this rate variation is modeled by a gamma distribution. And you have one parameter governing the breadth of this gamma distribution called alpha. We started with the default setting of Mr. Bayes, where you have an exponential, standard exponential distribution. And as a sanity check, we also conducted maximum likelihood tree inference. For that, we used software RaxML new generation. So 20 independent maximum likelihood tree searches for each dataset. And also a continuous time Markov chain model over binary data. And using maximum likelihood, we found an extreme bimodal distribution. So for some of the datasets, we found values close to 100, and 100 is the hard limit here. So we found extremely high values for lambda, while for the other datasets, we found fairly low values. And when going back to Bayesian inference and using a uniform prior, we found something very similar. So uniform prior between 0 and 100, basically the posterior distribution is uniform. So it seems like that for some datasets, the rate heterogeneity doesn't really affect the likelihood in the end, which is very strange and puzzling. We don't have a good explanation for that, but I wanted to present this finding here because, well, this is something which requires further attention. But how good are the results of the inference? So we evaluated the generated trees using the generalized quartet distance to the clutter log trees. So generalized quartet distance basically it's a measure of how consistent an automatically generated phylogeny is with an expert classification. Ranges between 0 and 1. 0 means perfectly compatible, 1 means totally incompatible. And here you find the results for the 10 data sets and for the 3 kinds of data sources we used. So the first column, these are cognacy data, the second column are sound correspondence data, and the third column is the combined data set. And you find that using sound correspondence data never gives the best result. The best results are either using just the cognacy data or using the combined data. And in cases where the combined data give us the best results, mostly the difference to the cognacy data is not very big. So we have clear evidence against the idea that sound correspondences provide the better access to historical groupings of languages. If we look at maximum likelihood, the results are qualitatively similar. So the best results are either cognacy data or combined data, and here we have 2 data sets where sound correspondences provide the best results, but then the delta to the 2 other methods is very small. So we can conclude preliminarily that trees inferred on the sound correspondence data are never substantially better, but often clearly worse across datasets. Inference on the cognacy data and on the combined data yield comparable result, and this qualitative pattern is the same with Bayesian inference and with maximum likelihood inference. So cognate-based phylogenies are topologically closer to the gold standard than those inferred for sound correspondence pattern. It is unclear whether adding sound correspondence data really improves the result, and we found this puzzling bimodal distribution of alpha values, and this is something we don't really understand yet, and this requires further elaboration. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.